Alrighty, everybody. I think we can go ahead and start. I let the slideshow go through 2 times, and now it's on its 3rd run through, so we can go ahead and start this up. Let me switch over to the correct right view. Off to a good start. Okay, everybody. So I clicked the wrong thing, but it's okay. I'm randomly higher up in my setup on the camera because Vivian kicked me out of my chair. You can see the chair right here. Just imagine right here, little Vivian. Maybe I can show you. Almost. Camera, come on. You can do it. Nope. No, it can't. Oh well. It was worth a try. I wanted to show a little Vivian, but oh well. Let's readjust that camera and get back to where we were. So, job search is still ongoing. I'm going to be going tomorrow, driving around the places that I've interviewed just to check on them again. Yeah, let's try screening the chair back. That's an obvious answer. Maybe I can just do that. That's how perspective works. I know physics. Come on. Baby. You can almost see her. Almost. Freaking camera stand. Yeah, hold on. I can make this work. There you go. There's a little sleepy Vivi. It worked. And my bed that was not made. But there's little Vivi. She hogs the chair anytime she gets the chance. So, I'm pretty used to it. I have a stool here anyway. Let me slide the camera in the right position now. That's close enough. You don't have to get it perfect. Got my messy bed because I was in a hurry. But yeah, I'm going to be checking all the places that I've interviewed. And there's one in particular, a Michaels, that I got a really good interview with. So I'm very excited to hear from them. Fingers crossed. Let's adjust it a little bit more. Close enough. Okay. So, meh. I'll slide this way. And so I definitely want to do a public lesson today about how to shade. And we will probably have... I'll try to make as many of these as I can before I start the job because I don't know what my schedule is going to be then. Who knows what's going to end up happening. I want to keep Fridays. Realizing the camera still needs to... This is the whole technical part before we begin. Because I want to be centered in camera. I'm not used to sitting on a stool in front of the camera. So that's why I'm higher up. But yeah, you get to see my messy room. But alright, without further ado, let's go ahead and switch over to the lesson because I'm excited for this. This is the most commonly asked question. A lot of people are always asking me how to shade because it's usually the step that makes your pictures look lively and interesting. So, let's switch to that. There we go. Okay, so scooting to center myself on the camera. Is it centered yet? Close enough. Okay, so I don't know if you remember this character. Hello, Bluey Wolf. Glad you could make it too. Yay. I'm doing public lessons. Normally these lessons every Friday are private, only on Patreon, but I try once a month to show everybody the lessons that I give. And yeah, this is probably the most commonly asked questions. Yeah, Jack remembered. Anna. She's one of the characters in the series I want to make called DMR, Death Metal Rabbits. So I like drawing them every once in a while. This is a picture that I've always been coming back to because it's a big epic pose for Anna. And this picture is a good example. I have a bunch of layers saved under the camera. You can see right now all of these layers we have that will show the steps of progress in drawing and shading. So I'm probably going to start off with a backdrop like this, so it's a lot easier to see line art. So let's go ahead and turn on some line art and start moving things around. All right, So now we have a plain canvas. That way you can see all the lines I've drawn. Now, I'm going to, in this lesson episode, skip the stage of shading unless you all are really curious to see it. I will still go ahead and preview the layer. This is what I start all my pictures as. Some of you have seen me doodle quite a bit, so you know that I'm kind of messy with all my sketching, and that's the way it should be. It's literally more useful if you're messy during your sketch. And the quick way I can show that, let's go into some blank area here. The reason you want to be messy during your sketches is, to put it simple, if you do one line, woo, you have one line. That isn't really many options. The point of sketching is to give yourself multiple options. You're trying to think on the page. So I would want to do this if I'm drawing a line. That is a sketch line by my own standard. This is what I want to see. So I would constantly, if I'm drawing a circle and it's sketch time, I'm going to do a circle like this. I'm going to purposefully make it a little messy. Because as I look at it, I might see this one as the right circle. I might see that. Welcome, Alex. I'm glad you can make it as well. I know you're busy. You have a lot going on. I'm really glad you could show up. Hopefully this is interesting and fun enough. Because usually I don't get to show these lessons very often, so this is a fun chance for me too. Hopefully it's interesting. Anytime you guys have questions, any questions at all about what's going on, just let me know. Just go ahead and mention it in chat, and I can go back. That's the way we usually run these. I have a lesson, but you can always ask questions. That is 100% okay. And so when you have messy sketches, it gives you multiple options. Here's one circle. Maybe I like that one. Maybe I like this one. You start seeing multiple options. And so that could be option A. And then you can also notice option B. And it's just sketchy. You don't have to keep it clean yet. Oh. You do have to check the size of your eraser, though. Otherwise, you'll erase the whole thing. So, the reason you want to get sketchy is because it gives you multiple options. That's why when people do sketches, somehow it looks good. It looks action-packed. And yet when you do your clean line art, some people can actually get frustrated and think that the clean lines feel too stiff and they don't look right, and you like your sketch better. So this is a very raw example of what I did during the sketch of Anna here. You then turn down the opacity, where if you were on paper, just make sure your sketch is done very lightly. Eventually, I want to set up the camera to be on my desk so you can watch me draw with a normal pencil or a pen. And you can literally see me draw traditionally. I've talked about that before. If you guys really want to see that, I'll try that one day. I've got the strings and the frets on a separate layer. Let's turn those off for now. So I've turned down the layer, and if this were on paper, you just draw lightly. Or you can erase. Both of those work. And good, Ulrich, you're here. And you can't say hi. I was using your phone and something. I got you. I understand that. I'm glad you can make it, though. Welcome aboard. Let me get a drink of refreshment to pace my throat's stamina, because talking is difficult. Okay, so this is obviously I'm tailoring to digital because I'm using a digital program. It's the easiest way to show you clean work. But I do want to put down a giant sheet of paper and one day try it traditionally and see if that is more relatable to you. But yeah, then you do your line art. And this is my favorite stage. Well, I don't know. Coloring, I said, is my favorite stage. I don't know. They're all kind of my favorite stage for a different reason. But basically, you do your line art there. I'm going to go quickly because we want to get onto the coloring. There we go. So, this is a lot of flat colors. Injustice 2. I didn't know you could play as the Ninja Turtles in Injustice 2. Cool. Good to hear that. You're tempting me. I don't talk about video games. So, let's see. The big thing here is just making sure that you're picking your colors. This is basically cell shading. You can notice that all the coloring I've done has no blending. It is just hard-edged colors next to each other. Like this. You're just taking one color and laying it there. No fancy effects. You're just doing that. And you can clean it up as you go, but notice that I have some shading on here, and I've noticed the most common problem is figuring out how much to add, because I think people can understand shadows in theory, but when it comes to putting it on the page, that gets tricky, because you're looking at it and going, okay, well, here's a circle, here's her head. Do I shade on the edge of everything? Because I've seen that a lot. I've seen people just go, well, I guess I'll just shade along the outside edge of her entire head. And the reason you don't want to do that around everything is it then becomes all the shadows are going to start to look the same, and it's going to lose the effect. Think about where you want the audience to look. That's probably my biggest thing. Let me know, again, anytime you guys have questions, just let me know, because I want to be sure I actually focus on that part. I'm giving you guys something to spark ideas, and then anything that comes to your mind as I do this, just let me know. Making sure I keep up with everything on this. And so, there's some ways in which you can actually get some really nice effects with having to do no blending at all. As you know, with blending, it usually, on the computer, has to do with your opacity. When you're drawing on paper, it's just how hard are you pressing on the paper with your pencil. Because if you're pressing really hard, the lines you make are going to be really dark. And you want to start light first. So if I were going to shade with a pencil here, under her hair, that's a good spot. Whenever two objects interact, that's where you want to have the shading. Let's actually go ahead and indicate that. Let's start from scratch. Maybe it'll help most if I start from scratch. Hearing questions from you guys gives me the most specific, but I can think of some basics that I think will help you a lot. We've got two objects right here, her hair and her forehead. Whenever you have two objects interacting, that's usually when you want to have some sort of shading. Now, sometimes it won't be very much, but even a little bit will make a big difference. So let's really break this down to make it look as simple as possible. I kind of worked on this backwards before the episode. As you may have noticed, I started with something very, very finished, and now I'm starting to clean it up and go backwards to show you all the shading I did. So originally we had something this complex, but I'm trying to backtrack to make it easier to understand. And again, any questions you have, that is always open, even if I'm talking. So okay. We've technically almost got three objects here. Let's go ahead and... pictures are never really feel that simple. Usually they get you intimidated after you've drawn all your line art. It's like, okay, now what do I do? So you lay down your colors, and now, where do I put the shadows? Figure out which one's in front of the other. When I look at this, the ear is closest to me. The ear is the closest object, therefore it's not really going to get much shading. This is a way to shade if you don't really know what your light source is. Now, if you have a specific light source, if I choose the light source on the left or on the right, that's obviously going to change stuff up. But just to get started, it's easiest if you... Okay, making sure the lighting's up there. Just think of which objects are on top of other objects. The ear is most on top, so I'll say A. Then you've got the hair, that's B. And then her forehead is C. It's going from closest to furthest. We're starting at the closest and going to the furthest. Basically, look at a bunch of objects. Try to break up the picture like a puzzle and realize, okay, A is on top of B. So B is going to get some shadow. Start darkest when you're closest to the ear, to the two objects. You're not going to add shading on A because A is really close to the camera. It's really close to us. And B is behind it. This is essentially what a drop shadow is. It is what a drop shadow is, because one object is dropping a shadow on the other object. So you want to start darkest closest to the object. And then as we get further away, let the shading get lighter. Do this very, very carefully. You don't want to overdo it. Less is more. You can always add more if you need it later on. But with this, all I did, just in a couple strokes. Let's go ahead and redo it, just in case you missed it. Let's rewind. Okay, so I know A is on top of B. It is closer to me than B. So I'm going to take a shadow, and I'm only going to do it next to the objects where they overlap. And with cell shading, that may be all I need. To me, that's a shadow. And there we go. I know that A is casting a shadow on B. And when you have objects overlapping, it almost doesn't matter where the light source is because they're overlapping. If they're overlapping, the light can't get between them. So you will always have a little bit of shadow, even if the light source is at a weird angle. I can eventually prepare a more complicated light source tutorial, but with the basics, when you have objects overlap, you're going to want a little bit of shadow between them. We can show that again, B to C, because B, her hair, is still overlapping on her forehead, so I'll still want to add a little bit of shading where they overlap. Now, obviously her hair is literally attached to her head, so right there, it's going to get really, really dark, because they're literally attached. So you can get really dark there. And notice I'm not using blending right now. I'm not doing any blending right now. I could consider doing the Ninja Turtles in the future. That's a good recommendation. I've never really tried drawing them before. Right now I got to stick to the prepared thing, so it's easier for me to teach the lesson. But I'm glad you recommended it. I don't think I've ever tried drawing them. Who's your favorite Ninja Turtle? I need to rewatch that. There's so many shows I need to rewatch. It's actually where I need to find time off at some point, because I've got all these characters and all these lessons and everything so productive in my head. I've been forgetting to watch shows. So I know in the last Jackrabbit stream on Tuesday, we talked a lot about nostalgia, and it's making me realize how many shows I still I've seen like one episode of, and then I need to go back and watch them. Especially now that Adventure Time is finished, I really need to go back to that one. So many shows. And yeah, you can notice, even though I'm not doing fancy blending, we can still get some fading effects here. Raphael, okay, I'm gonna need to... Yeah, I will consider that in the future, because there's a lot of characters out there that I've always heard of and need to get accustomed with them better. There we go. Okay, I got you. Yeah. I like their dynamic. They're fun characters. Okay, making sure that's set. Alright. So the darkest is going to be... Well, we could go that dark. Is going to be where the objects are closest to each other. And as the hair is moving away from her head, away from the place they overlap, you can get lighter and lighter. You don't want to overdo shading. If you can go through the whole picture barely doing any shading, that will keep the picture looking clean. Exactly, Alex. It is cell shading. It helps a lot when you work that way. You go slowly doing little amounts. Because that's the reason that some pictures can look clean or they can look messy if you try to add too much. I know sometimes I can get in the habit of lowering my opacity and thinking I can just get really carried away, adding lots and lots of really complex shading. You get in there and you're constantly like, okay, wait, is this the right shade? And you keep trying to blend colors, and you're trying to add it on every single little corner. And I know I've had it with hair. You get into the habit of thinking you have to draw all the individual hairs, and you go, wait, should they be this dark? Maybe I should make them lighter. I don't know which. Maybe it's a lot of little lines like this. Is that correct? Maybe they're too dark. And you start trying to build a texture here, but you're not sure if you should be going darker or lighter. because you're getting carried away with these tiny little details. And that's not how you want to start a picture. I know I've had that in the past. I know I've had those tendencies. But trust me, it's easier to keep a picture presentable and clean if you start small. So only add shading in tiny places and don't do much. If I'm going to add shine, that's another big shading thing. And if you're using this on paper, you can use an eraser for shine. I do that all the time. Be sure to do it only a tiny bit. So right here, I'm going to barely add some shine. You can do it as a little zigzag pattern to kind of go across the texture of her hair. That's one method. You can just do some lines like this. It's another method. You're basically hinting at a texture, but you're not adding that much. You could even go with a fat brush. You could go like this and add a big effect shine and maybe chisel it up a little bit. Kind of carve the edges to look sharp. But don't add much. See? We've done that much, and maybe that's too much. Maybe I actually start carving it more and go, let's see, maybe this is all I need. And I keep carving away at it, but that's all I've done. That is one white line that I started chiseling up and carving it away to get this weird shape. And that's all I'm going to do. Maybe that's all the picture needs. When it comes to people who do animation, this is what they do all the time in order to save time and still get a whole lot of work to look good. You can see over here, I didn't blend, yet we've got a bunch of layers and colors and stuff in her hair. And pictures can get really complicated. We can have so many objects overlapping. And my mind says, well, which objects are on top of each other? Clearly, the guitar is really high up on the level, but her hand is on top of the guitar. So there's going to be a little bit of a shadow we could put underneath the hand on the guitar. Some of it you can see is already kind of there. And keep it simple. You don't need to go all out to do things like this, where it's super complex. Save that for the end. You got a surprise non-art question. Have I practiced the A sound? At least 2 light sources? It technically can. We're getting an ambient light. And I might as well go ahead and talk about that. It's probably a good thing to explain. I have not been able to practice that sound of the A with the 2 dots. I already forgot the name of them. My German is not that good. So my answer is 9, sadly. I have not. Job searching has taken up over my attention. What Miracusa touches on there in the chat is mentioning 2 light sources. Basically, we've got ambient light. Because even if you don't have a specific spotlight on you, like right now, me in front of the camera, there's a bunch of lamps around me, so you can't really tell which one is casting the shadow. So that's why I think of overlapping objects. You don't have to focus too much on where your light source is until later. Just focus on making the objects look separate. This becomes even more important when you get to painting. But just in a normal picture, if you're trying to figure out shading, look at where objects overlap and put shading on the object that's underneath. And don't add that much. Do a tiny bit. As we see, we did right there. And I'm keeping it a curved shape, not a big flat line like this. Now look at this. The guitar's neck does have a straight edge, so you think, okay, I should make this line straight, right? It follows the pattern of the neck. But the object underneath her, which is her arm is curved because we're fleshy creatures and we have a lot of round 3D shapes. So you want to curve this line. And sometimes you can play around with these curves and see which one you like the most. One way that I do it and make things really interesting to me is I'll break it up. I'll add little tiny lines on the edge of it. This adds a little bit of texture. And since this is a rabbit person, fur. Obviously fur is going to be a factor. So I'm going to add lots of little lines between it so that this reminds you of fur. I do this with patterns. I do this with just any kind of shading when there's texture. I really want to see if there's a way I can trick the eye to feel like this is a bunch of texture. But you saw what I did. It's not that complicated at all. I barely did anything, but now it feels right. That's the big thing with shading. You want to make it your secret weapon that you don't use that often, only for effect. We can clean up the coloring here on the jeans, and then underneath the guitar, on top of the jeans, there will be a little bit of shadow because they overlap. So we're going to take the color of the jeans, go a little bit darker, doesn't have to be much, and we're going to imitate the shape there. And because this is cloth, we can see some folds. So you have to visualize, are some of those folds higher up, or are some of those folds dipping down? There are lots of little hills and valleys when cloth does that. So some parts are going to have more shading, and you can be the judge of that. You can decide. And basically, I go around the entire picture doing this. I think about, where does it overlap? Some parts create little caves. There's a bunch of little objects grouped around here, so I can definitely put some shading there. And play around with the shapes. Maybe I like it going like this towards these little bullets on her belt. But maybe I like the shape doing it this way instead. Go ahead and play around with the shapes, because technically you're doing a lot of effects. A lot of artists will have fun creating unique shapes with this. Sometimes they'll do sharp edges. You saw how I did the fur texture. I did lots of little broken edges. Have fun with that. And it doesn't need to be very much. When you zoom out on this whole picture, I didn't add that much shading. And you don't want to have very much. If you do too much, the picture gets muddy. You want to keep the picture looking clean. So as I'm adding all this shading, just put tiny amounts. Just tiny amounts. Little tiny corners. So that I get the right effect. And as I zoom out, I can then look at it and go, here's her pocket. Pockets you put things in, so there's clearly a little groove there. So inside the pocket, I'm going to put a tiny bit of shading there. Just a hint that it's 3D. I'll carve it a little, decide how much looks right, if I want a lot of shading or if I just want a tiny bit. The more shading you put, the further away the object looks. So you don't want to get carried away with that. And you just go around the entire picture thinking which objects are on top and which objects are underneath. This XLR cable that's plugging into the guitar is casting a little shadow, so I might add a little bit right there. It doesn't have to be much, but just a little bit. Just for the right effect. And see how we're getting a whole lot of 3D texture. And I'm not doing any blending, no weird shading or color theory. You can add color theory into this if you want the right effect. So one thing I would say to avoid with these is don't go to just adding black. One shading style I see that we can go ahead and show right now that I say you should probably avoid is just taking the color black, going to your character, making the opacity low, and just adding shading like this, where you're just adding in black. Try to avoid that. If you can add blue or red into the color instead, that will have a nicer effect. If you just add black, that can make things just look kind of muddy. It can work, but you'll notice it kind of muddies the picture. The shading doesn't really feel that lively. I mean, there are ways to make that work. Some styles really emphasize that. I know with, what is it? The character All Might from My Hero Academia, they purposefully add really heavy black shadows for the effect. So I've mentioned before, all of the things I teach that are rules, you can always break them. You can always break these rules if it gives you the effect that you like. So I just want to point that out there, just in case it comes across your mind of, I don't want to do that. He's saying I have to use this technique. I don't want to do that technique. You don't have to use it if you have a different effect you're wanting. But the reason it's good to try different techniques is that you might discover how to use it. They're basically a bunch of little tools to use. And the more tools you have, the more variety of art you can make. Knowing how to only shade one way, you're not going to have much variety. And your picture can look more alive if you know a bunch of different ways. So there might be one way that I shade the hair, a different way that I shade her fur or her eyes, and then a different way I do the clothes, and then another way that I do the guitar. It's a bunch of different ways to shade, and if you learn more of them, your art can grow faster. So that's why I would say consider it and try it, and from there go ahead and pick your favorites and see what you like more. So I would just basically be going around. Her chin is obviously covering here, so I'm going to try and add shading, but notice we've got two objects that are getting shading here, and if I get too dark on this part of her shirt, it almost blends in with the strap of her guitar. So keep in mind of the color of the object. Her shirt is a lighter color than the strap. Fundamentally, the strap is like a dark kind of color, so the shadows on the strap should be darker than the shadows on her shirt, usually. So right here in this pocket, I'm going to make sure that these shadows don't get as dark as the shadows here. The shadows on her strap might go full on, down to black. We might do that if we want that kind of look. I don't think I want it that dark. I like to still see the line art, but you can. Hopefully this is easy enough to understand at this point. I'm trying to show the easy way to use it. I'll just think of how all the objects are overlapping. That's like the biggest way that I've made a picture easier when I don't know where the light source is. If you add a light source, it does affect where you put shadows. Because if the light source were on this side, then there wouldn't be much of a shadow under her chin. So light source can affect it, but it isn't always the first step. You may interject. Most artists' style were derived from a number of different artists. That's very, very true. If you like an artist's style, something they do, it's okay to derive from those ideas, basically as long as you're not copying. But I will say that if you're looking at a picture and trying to copy it to learn, I actually endorse that a lot. I love that idea because I've done that a lot. I've literally just looked up a picture of my favorite artist's picture of a dragon, and I got a sheet of paper and just tried to draw it as perfect as I could. You don't want to then post that online because then you've copied. But if you use that to learn how to do the textures, how to do the shading, that can work. And in general, that's what I say here, is that I'm showing you what I know for shading. Try it because you may discover something really useful. And yeah, I agree, Ulrich, that eventually you're going to mix them all together. That's why don't worry. I know sometimes there's also the fear of like, but what's my style? I've heard a lot of people say, what's my style? I need to find my style. Yes, you will make decisions about your style, but more or less, style is just what you do the most. I never picked my style. I just drew a lot. And then eventually I moved on to painting, and I just painted a lot. A style, yes, you're going to choose some techniques, but for the most part, you just kind of just draw. Just draw a lot. And eventually, you're going to stop doing things that you hate, and you're going to keep doing things that you like. And that's going to become your style just over time. I've heard so many people who do have a style say, I wish I knew what my style was. And it's like, you have a style. If you don't like the style, aim for more things that you do like and keep experimenting, because then your style will grow. My style is actually still growing, and there's some things I don't like. That's just going to be normal. Artists are too hard on themselves. Just don't worry there. And okay, Ulrich, you're saying your line art style derived from an artist on the DSI years ago on Flipnote. Okay. Oh, and okay, you're using my color texture style for as an example for your own. Yeah. I'm very flattered. I'm glad to hear that. And I know it won't be copying. And also, you'll eventually see other artists too and try drawing from them. And that's what I'm actually still wanting to do with some of my art. I'm comfortable with some of what I do, but there's actually some things that I want to experiment more. Mainly character design. I want to try weirder designs. Jak is actually where I get a lot of inspiration of wanting to try weirder characters. I want to change the shapes and sizes of anatomy, I want to really experiment with that, because at the moment I feel in my own head I feel stuck. So that happens. Don't worry if you get those thoughts. You're not failing as an artist. Don't listen to those thoughts. It just demotivates you. Instead, just experiment more. This is a good transition to recap what happened in the last episode. I can't say everything I want in this one episode because there's too many things to talk about. But that's the reason I'm trying to do public episodes, so that in case you can't see my private ones over on Patreon, this can still give you a little bit of a chance. So there's a picture we did last time. I believe we posted it in the Patreon folder. You're getting to see all my files. And yeah, saying derived is key. Knowing how much to derive it is always, up to each person's opinion. And yeah, basically just don't copy pictures. If someone sees your art style and says, "You look just like so-and-so," there's a lot of people out there. No matter what style you have, there will be other people who have a similar style. Just keep drawing what you like. Over time, you'll still refine your style. So don't worry about that. I would say it's much better to keep studying other art and get more ideas than to stay in your own tunnel. Because then you feel stuck that way. You're only seeing your own art and it feels like it's hard to grow. Where is that example? Pretty sure we saved it here. Here we go. Okay. This is what we did last time. We talked about some of this. What I would do in school all the time, whenever I had no idea what I wanted to draw, and I was sitting in math class. Ow! Vivian? She wants to be in the lesson. Here's little Vivian. Yeah, you want to be in the lesson. You're gonna climb on my desk, though. I know you are. Aren't you? You're adorable. Yeah. Yeah, you are. You're not gonna stay still, though, too. Okay. Go ahead and get down. Here's the stool. You like the stool? She can sit on the stool. Maybe I can get my chair back. We'll see. Okay, and let me read the chat. Jack mentioning a lot of your own style comes from more of the media than the inspiration. That's a good point. Like when the tools I'm using influence how the stuff looks. Oh yeah, exactly. And that means you'll have a lot of endless fun if you're just focused on the process of drawing. Let me let my cat out and switch chairs. No. Still doing it. There we go. Now I'm going to look short. Now I'm short. I'm short. And I mean, honestly, with all of this, it just becomes what's your goal. If you are doing something with art that satisfies you, then that's all you need, in my opinion. With the exception being, you don't want to obviously copy someone's art to the point of, infringing on their art. Don't copy people's art and then say it's yours. But, I would emphasize learning from other people's art is really useful. Again, it's all about the way you want to learn. And what your goal is. Wow, it's weird being back in a normal chair. So anyway, what I would fill my my notebooks when I would be sitting in math or science class and I was bored and I didn't want to be doing anything else and I didn't know what to draw, I would doodle. And I would doodle lots of I would practice techniques and just shapes and try making the shapes look good. I would do that all the time. I would just literally make a blob and go like, okay, here is a blob. It doesn't even have to be a perfect blob. Now I'm going to try adding extra lines along the edge that copy its shape. And I would just do stuff like this for hours. I would do this all the time. And I didn't realize it, but this is actually really useful. So even if you don't know what to draw, you can still draw. That's my point, is I've heard a lot of people say when they have artist block, it's like, well, I can't draw. It's like, you can still draw, even if you don't know what to draw. Because I know people will tie themselves in knots going, I should be productive, I should be practicing art, but I don't want to draw, but I should be drawing. And it's like, well then, just doodle. Doodle without stress. If you do a bunch of blobs, there's no pressure. And yet you can try 3D techniques and make things look fancy, even though it's just a blob. And you can make 3D shapes. This almost looked like a guitar, so I just kind of went with it and tried to make it a guitar. And this ties in with what Jack was saying in the chat, is that you can get carried away and have fun just enjoying the medium. Like, if you're using ink, or you're using a pencil, or you're painting, have fun with it. So actually, that can be a really good way to counter artist block. Because you're like, I don't know what to draw, and it needs to be perfect. And I know a lot of people, like me, can get really stressed when you see a blank sheet of paper. Because it's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, well, you don't have to do anything. I closed one of my windows here. Where is it? Zoom out, fit to size. No size. Well, that's the right button, but I wanted to view the toolbar. It got turned off. Window, here we go. It might be navigator. There we go. I've got the little navigator window back. It randomly closed that. Okay. So, yeah, there are different techniques. I only show what I know, obviously, and I'm trying to show how it's practical in case you're stuck. That's my biggest thing. Because I've had to find my way out of being stuck multiple times, and I've learned a lot of shortcuts. And that's the biggest thing I share here, is that I found a lot of methods that work, and hopefully these give you ideas. That's ultimately what any of this tutorial stuff should be. It's just, it gives you ideas. And you might be surprised how you use them. Obviously, it's up to you on your goal. That's just all why I show you what I have. So, let's see how far we are now. I can make this go a little bit longer. I've been trying to keep these kind of short unless you guys have questions, because I want there to be rewatchability. I want to make sure people can come back to this and watch the whole thing. So we'll wind it down. We'll get another 10, 20 minutes, depending on if you guys have questions, or just stuff you want to see. But I do have to save character suggestions and all that. That's a whole nother thing I want to do later. I can't do that in these lessons just yet. But I'm glad you let me know, Bluey Wolf. I did see people talking about the Brutals from Super Mario, so that's good to know there. I do know a couple of those characters, so well, I know of all of them. I don't think I've drawn a lot of them. So yeah, one more thing on my mind is how to transition to painting. Unless you guys have another question, I might go ahead and show that. Let's erase the ABC thing and show the quickest way I have found to try painting digitally. Because technically, you think about it, I'm still using the same brush that I would be doing with cell shading. We talked about it. We just literally are taking flat colors. You're deciding, okay, her hair is kind of this purplish, is it almost magenta? Taking this purple color and going, okay, what am I going to do with it? And you take a darker color and make that the shadow. All digital painting actually is just lowering the opacity. You can see it where my mouse is right now. I lowered the opacity. And all we're doing is using the color picker, which is usually the Alt key. Occasionally a different program will have a different button like the I. If you click I, that might be the color picker. For me, it's the Alt key. So you can select a color. You notice as I switch back and forth, it's switching colors between her light and dark portions of hair. You click one of them, you have low opacity, and then you color between them. Now as I color between them, we have a new color. You then select that new color, and you're still on low opacity. So now you kind of shade between them again. And if you like the darker one, select the darker one. If you like the lighter one, select the lighter one. And you're basically just going back and forth of add a couple marks, use the color picker, and constantly use the color picker for the color you want. And as you see, I'm constantly going Alt key, click, shade, shade, Alt key, click, and constantly going back and forth to get a faded look. And that's all digital painting actually is. Now, one way you can make it look really fancy is thinking about the direction, because you're trying to make a texture. If I do all my lines, as you see, up and down, that's not the right texture for me. I think this actually is a really big thing that can make a huge difference if you do it. Think about the texture. it's hair. So obviously all the strands of hair are going this way. The line art gives you an answer. The line art is all going this direction. So it's going to help a lot whether this is cell shading or painting. Let's show with cell shading. You can have all your cell shaded lines be little triangles going in that direction. They point. And when they point, now it kind of feels like those are clumps of hair. And now we're getting kind of a 3D texture already. You're not even adding that much to it, but suddenly it feels kind of 3D. So that's how you can do it with cell shading. And then with painting, you just lower the opacity and start doing blending. You can choose, whatever opacity level is easy for you, but just start blending this way. Do a bunch of lines in the right direction, making sure you go this way. Because now every time you make a mark, it's going to start to look like strands of hair. And like we said before, don't get carried away. Don't do too much. Less is more. Because if you don't do much, the rest of it will look smooth. Only add it in certain places, like we've done here. And over time, like we see here, I'll keep the line art a little bit just so we can see. But I've started doing a lot of textures and having a lot of fun with the blending this way. And that's how I do my painting. I then just turn off the line art. So if you find yourself doing cell shaded art where you do the line art and then you add some flat colors and a couple shadows and you go, I'd like painting, but painting sounds weird. I don't want to, it sounds too difficult. Because I had that, I don't remember how many years ago, maybe like 5 or 6. Painting just sounded like some bizarre concept that I was like, no, I'm not getting near that. That's too complicated. But the way I learned to do it was just take a normal picture. To me, this was as good as I always did. This was the only style I basically did. And I would turn down the line art. I would slowly turn down the opacity. So it's not really easy to see the line art anymore. And when it gets this faded, you can even turn it off completely. Now you're going to have a bunch of blobs. And the key to make it painting is to just clean up these blobs and start adding texture. That's actually all you have to do. It's going to take a while to get used to it, but this is the shortcut I found that makes it way easier to go from cell shaded to painting. Like that's actually all you need to do. It will take practice to learn how to use the Alt key and how to blend the right kind of texture. Because without line art, it feels tricky to get all these objects separate. And honestly, that's where shadows come in. If I want these fingers to show up, but I'm not using line art, I'm just going to take a shadow color and slowly add some that fades. We're slowly adding it that fades. Maybe I'll turn it up a little. There we go. I turn up the opacity if I'm in a hurry. But if I have to do a really smooth blending, I'll turn the opacity down. But when I'm in a hurry, I kind of turn it up so it's quicker to add the shading. But if you use the Alt key a lot, the color picker, you can eventually get that blended effect. And you can slowly go in there and actually add some fur texture on the edge of her fingers, her hand here. This is a fur texture. So I'm going to take this color and in very small amounts add little strands like this. Just little bits, especially on the corner of something like her elbow. Let's turn off the white so now you can see this. Let's start cleaning this up. I'm going to start adding little amounts on the edge. We can take our eraser and kind of carve too. These are all the things you slowly do you have more freedom with when you're painting. So in some ways it can make things easier. I kind of switch back and forth depending on my mood. So yeah, and that can actually have a lot of cool effect, which you can see left over. There's still some line art that can be useful. So if you're afraid of doing painting and you're like, it's too complicated, I want to try it, but I don't know how to do that. Hopefully this method could help. It helped me a lot. It's the way I learned, because before, again, I just heard people talking about painting and that just sounded complicated. And I was like, I want line art. I want to draw with lines and then color. That's all I want to do. But then I eased my way in and it became a lot easier. And then on a separate layer, we have the lines for the guitar strings and the frets. And then I got a bunch of lighting in the background, and we could have a light source, we want to make it interesting, I did it in the thumbnail. We could say the bottom corner has a lot more light going. So let's start adding a bit of white here. Let's go ahead and protect that alpha. Don't know if you guys remember from the last time we did this, but we talked about the protect alpha key. A little button here, right under my camera. Protect alpha is what Medibang calls it. That's the program I'm using, Medibang. It's completely free on any device, so that's really cool. And it's pretty good for a free program. On Photoshop, it's called Lock Transparent Pixels, and it does the same thing. Or you can, I finally am looking it up more, there's a thing called clipping layers. Clipping also does the same thing. Now I can finally show you exactly how it works. If I take the color white, because I'm adding a shadow, or the opposite, I'm adding some lighting. We can do this, and we're adding that lighting, but obviously it goes outside the lines. If you lock transparent pixels, if you protect alpha, I can shade, but it never goes outside the lines. And that's how I keep my stuff clean. But what if you want to do the shading on a different layer, but you still want it to have this effect of never going outside the lines? That's what clipping is. I have a new layer here. You can see I keep turning it on and off. Let's go ahead and label it new. And if I color right now, it obviously goes outside the lines. If I click clipping, you can see it does a little indent now on that layer. And now if I start to color, it stays within the boundaries of the layer underneath it. And so it's basically the same as Protect Alpha, but it's a separate layer. To me, I already have way too many layers on my pictures, so I don't want to use clipping. That's yet another layer to keep track of. But it could be really useful if you want to like test out multiple versions and go, okay, let's see how this looks. And you compare it and go, So it could be really useful. It's not what I like to use, but clipping could be really nice for you. But when I want to add a really bright second light source, because the first one's obviously above her. You can tell I made her fur really, really bright as we go up here. This is where the obvious light source is. There's a spotlight here because the shadows are on this side. But we can see a hint of another light source. There's a little bit of white right along here. And that's from a second light source known as a highlight. And I might want to make it red. We've shown that in the past in other pictures, and I want to show it again. I'm going to lock the transparent pixels so I can color inside the lines, and I might blend it. But if we go full opacity, we can just do it with normal red. Now, obviously, if I start adding a red lighting here, it just blends into the background, and that's not very bright. That doesn't look that good. So if you want it to show up, start with white. Let's make sure we lock the transparent pixels first, so it stays inside the lines. There we go. I'm starting with white. I do want it to be red to do a really dramatic effect, but I'm going to start with white just so that it shows up. And I've had pictures where I start with white and then I end up staying with white because I didn't want any more red on her. But if you do, after we add this white here, you're then going to blend red next to the white. That's all you really have to do. So I'm adding these white lines here, trying to keep them smooth. And again, the same way we showed shading, can do the same thing with lighting. Which objects are on top of each other? This guitar is on top, so I'm going to give it a really, really bright highlight. And I might use the Shift key so that I can do a straight line really quick. That's how I did the strings. I can add a straight line like that. Makes it easier to keep it for like machinery or architecture or any kind of building. Go ahead and use the Shift key. It can be really useful to go ahead and, get some straight lines like this. But if you're doing fur or hands or something, usually you don't want to use sharp, bold lines like this. It's going to have a robot effect. Unless you like that effect. Because Invader Zim does that all the time. Where the head is made out of sharp edges like this. And you can have a little ears and it's almost grr. But anyway. Once you have this down, Then you can maybe take the red and next to it add a little bit, just a little bit of this lighting to kind of copy the edge. You're copying the edge, basically where the line art would be. You're kind of imitating that next to the white lines. And when you do something like this, eventually fading it or blending it, anything like that, it'll start to look like a faded light effect. So there's yet another way to add a second light source, and I like to do that with painting especially, because you can get really, really, it can add a really nice effect. This kind of effect I'm doing right now on the jeans. You can add a lot of 3D shape, and we show that on her face especially. This white shine from a secondary light source. It helps her pop out. It's a nice effect. It usually helps me, the picture looks done if I do that. So I might also do it on the edge of this guitar right here to add a little bit of that second light source. It's all about effect. I think people overemphasize realism. Realism's just one technique that can help you. We were talking about it earlier. Copying styles to learn techniques. If that is your way to learn, don't just follow it religiously. Don't just go, okay, this is what I have to do. This is the way to do it. Because it's not. It's all about what effect do you want. And with this picture, I want the effect of showing off this edge because it makes really dramatic lighting. Doesn't have to be realistic. It's what effect looks right. So yeah, I'm gonna always be reaffirming that. Don't follow things as absolute truth that you have to follow. Art is still about what effect you want. So yeah. Unless there are any other questions, that might be it for the shading tutorial for now. We're keeping it shorter just because I want people to be able to watch this later in case they want to. It's something that Jak and I are also doing with the Jackrabbit. We're seeing how shorter episodes actually feel, because sometimes they're kind of useful. They allow you to get to the point, you can have a lot of fun, and then go ahead and end it so that someone can watch it later. My habit is to just talk forever and have a lot of fun just chilling. And eventually I might do some of that too. Bunch of transition right now with my new job. I'm waiting for those calls. I'm going to visit the places tomorrow just to see what their status is, because the place I want to be hired at, they said they were still figuring out which positions they need to fill. So that could be why it's taking a long time. That's what my fingers are crossed. But I am going to keep looking because I need somewhere soon. That's why my activity isn't as high as I want it to be. I want to be doing a lot more. The next quick Let's Draw is still really close to done, but I haven't had much time to work on it. Because I'm still trying to figure out that series. Trying to figure out the method, but the whole intro of it is done. Most of the drawing of it is done. So it's almost released, but right now I'm focusing on finishing up the commissions I have and finding that other job. So yeah. That's why I'm lucky I can even do the few live streams we're doing each week. I'm still glad to do that. I'm still trying to share lessons like this, because once I get the job, I don't know what my schedule is going to be. So this was, doing it while I can, because eventually it may not be on Fridays anymore. It may change drastically, and I want to make sure I do what I can before the change happens. In case there are any more questions, I've got a little bit of time. Otherwise, I need to go get food, so I'm starving. But hopefully that makes it really interesting. Not just interesting, but like easy to follow with how shading works. Light sources are important because clearly I have the light source on the left and the shadows on the right, because I want to show off most of her face. Sometimes that's the only way, the only reason I decided on a light source. People go like, well, I don't know where to put a light source. I get that. But sometimes all you need to do is just go, okay, here's the face. I want to show off most of her face, so I'm going to have the light over here so that it shows most of her face. Sometimes that's all you need, just something as simple as that. And from there, just make sure all the shadows are on the opposite side. So, yes, light sources are important, but if you don't pick a light source, just make sure you look at where objects are overlapping. I don't know if that's a popular belief. I don't know if a bunch of artists would claim heresy that I'm saying the wrong thing. I'm just showing what works for me. I'm saying so far this has been a really good method. It's just look at objects and go, okay, where do they overlap? And anything that's underneath, put a little bit of a shadow. A little bit. Like we did on the arm here and all over the body, just showing where objects overlap. Hopefully that is easy enough to follow. If you'd like to see me go into more detail about 2 light sources or any other questions you have, go ahead and let me know, because I would like to prepare things like this for you. And the guiding force is knowing what you want to see. I do more one-on-one lessons about specific things on Patreon every week. So if you're curious about that, even just $1 would help me a whole lot. You get prizes if you go $5 and more, but just $1 gets you the lessons, because I want to make sure I can share as much as possible. And any support does help me a lot, especially if you like seeing these videos. I think we'll call it a night unless there's any more questions. I know this was a little bit of a surprise. We're doing these once a month where I share the lessons. And in the future, there'll probably be more one-on-one, where if there's someone specifically who wants to get lessons on how to color or lessons on how to do poses or anything like that, then we can schedule a one-on-one kind of dynamic. But for now, I'm trying to cover the basics, share what I can as I'm preparing for a new job. So, yeah, I believe that's it. Unless you guys have questions, this is your last chance. I'm about to do the wind down thing. I'll take a drink of water so I can... It's not water, it's fruit juice. Same difference.